Well, the interesting thing about where the film industry is now is that what was considered B movies back when I was starting, which was science fiction, fantasy, comic book movies, are now the most desirable movies. They're the movies that all the studios want to do. They're the tent poles. They're the ones that audiences want to see around the world. And that was simply not the case back then. Not only that, but back in the 80s and the 90s, it began to change in the 90s, but people did not tend to make sequels to movies. That was considered unusual. The general expectation was that a sequel would make, maybe 60% of what the original movie did, and now it's often that the sequel makes many times more than the original film. I don't know that that's necessarily good for filmmaking. I think originality and, and taking chances informs a better quality of film. But you also can't deny the fact that audiences are still clamoring for films with characters that they're familiar with. I think it's interesting that it's both the sequels and films that followed characters on their continuing journey, but it was also the advent of streaming. Because without streaming, if you were telling a serialized story, you couldn't catch up. If you missed an episode, that was it. You were out of luck. And very few broadcasters would risk losing audiences because someone had missed an episode. And so streaming allowed people to catch up. The Walking Dead began streaming on Netflix after a certain number of seasons, and AMC would repeat an episode right before a new one aired on Sunday nights. That also allowed people to catch up in case they'd missed an episode. What I love about the film industry, regardless of whether you're doing a small film, a documentary, a TV series, a large feature film, is that it's a community. You're working with film professionals. Just as we are right now as we're doing this interview, it's not just us. It takes an entire crew to put something together. And if you like working collaboratively with other people, it's the perfect medium. There are frustrations, but if you're a producer, you're a serial entrepreneur and you're a risk taker. So to try new things all the time and push yourself out of your safe zone is something that you have to enjoy. Otherwise, it's not the career for you. So I think that the world needs stories and characters that unite us rather than tear us apart. So it's very important now to find those stories, to find those characters. And I've always been attracted to stories about ordinary people who question their own importance in the world, in their community, question their abilities, who are thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And that could be Sarah Connor in the Terminator. That could be a true life woman, Wilma Mankiller, who went from a homeless woman living on Cherokee tribal lands to, within 10 years, being the first woman elected principal chief of the nation. So you can tell that story in so many different genres and so many different times, and it's always going to have a different twist, and yet it's going to relate to many different people depending on which kind of story that you're telling. So I've told that story in television. I've told that story in Aliens and Terminator and even the movie that we screened this morning, Dick, which is a comedy starring Michelle Williams and Kirsten Dunst. That's also about ordinary people. I think you have to be an optimist to be in this business. You have to be a little bit optimistic, a little bit crazy, but you can't just settle for the status quo. And diversity these days is now something that has become more accepted. Not only gender diversity, but ethnic diversity, diversity of backgrounds. And, so I see a lot of positive change. And I see more opportunities. I see more opportunities for people to advance in their careers and to star in stories that in the past would not have had a woman in the lead or a person of color.